This is Classic FM.
So I'm here at the Musical Brain Conference and very, very happy to be talking to Professor Michael Trimble. Lovely to meet you.
Very great pleasure to be here and to have been invited to this great conference.
Now, my first question for you is that why do you think music provokes such a reaction in humans?
That's been discussed a little bit this morning, and it seems fairly certain that the very first language, if I can put it like that, some people don't like to refer to music as a language, but clearly it has many properties of language, that the very earliest languages that our forefathers spoke were of a musical nature. And certainly music is, or the response to music is as deeply embedded in our brain as later on in evolution our propositional language becomes embedded within the brain. I often think, what would it be like to go back to the time when our ancestors, before Homo became sapiens, became wise, that had language, what it must have been like to actually have a brain that didn't have the input for propositional language. And presumably you were hearing sounds of nature, and you were hearing all kinds of other sounds and beginnings of a musical culture, which began before propositional language, a language which says, I know that this is a good conference, for example.
So romantic music is often particularly emotive and creative. Are there any particular styles of music that you think provoke an emotional response in particular?
Well, I suppose the very word romantic brings in a different musical era, but also a different era for all kinds of other arts, including, of course, poetry. What is particularly interesting, I think, I've been doing surveys really about what kind of music makes people emotionally responsive. And so when I give lectures, I ask for a show of hands. What art form makes you cry? Because I'm particularly interested in crying tears. And music comes out tops every time. But when I did some studies in Japan with a Japanese audience, what's quite interesting is that their emotional responses, crying responses, are to Western music and not to classical Japanese music. And again, what is interesting, if you go to concerts, opera, whatever, the number of people, composers, well, at least singers or players from the Far East are some of the very, very best interpreters of classical Western music and also romantic music. So romantic music has been able to not only dominate Western culture, but wherever it seems to go around the world, it moves in there as well. So there's something very special about romantic music, if one can use that term. I know a lot of, strictly speaking, people who classify music wouldn't like the term romantic, but there's certainly something very important about the development of Western music as we know it that has resonances within the human brain.
Gosh. We were just talking about humans crying. You've just actually written a book called Why Humans Like to Cry. Do you think in comparison to other art forms, music is particularly emotional and makes people cry?
There are two art forms that come out most strongly as those which people cry to. The first is literature by far. If you have an audience and you say who responds to music by crying, and I'm talking about tears, 90% of people will put up their hands. The other one which rates very highly is reading novels, embedding yourself in a narrative and living another life, if you like, in a story. But when you get down to asking how many people cry to looking at a painting or to looking at a sculpture or a piece of architecture, you go down and down. I mean, very few people cry looking at a fantastic piece of architecture. So, but the interesting thing to me about the crying issue is that human beings are the only living species that cry tears for emotional reasons. And that has to raise a particular question. Why should that be? What is the meaning of the tear in terms of the development of human culture?
Moving from that on to how music can help people with movement disorders, epilepsy, things like that, do you think it is powerful enough to overcome adversity?
Well, I guess this particular meeting is not quite about overcoming a particular physical illness. It was really to do with Beethoven's loss of hearing, of course, and how music may have helped him. However, music therapy is quite useful in certain settings, and you raise movement disorders particularly. And of course the great thing about music is it makes you move. You want to move with movements. Emotion, the word emotion, is 6/7 motion, and it's motion that gives us the emotion. And music therapy can be used, for example, to help people with aphasic disturbances, loss of propositional language, but also in, for example, conditions like Parkinson's disease, where there is a huge inability to move fluidly and when you want to move. And by patterning movement, by input with music, again, you can help those kind of movement disorders.
Thank you so much. Fascinating stuff. Thank you.